In this video today, we are talking about diverticulitis. So we're going to cover the differences between diverticular disease and diverticulitis, but we're going to keep it then strictly physical. So we're not going to talk about the mental aspect of it, but we're going to dive into what makes it a daily struggle. So we can make other videos on the causes, on the complications, on the definitions, on the treatment. But in this video today, we are focusing solely on the signs and symptoms of diverticulitis, not diverticular disease. We'll briefly touch on it, but we'll focus more on diverticulitis and the signs and symptoms of diverticulitis. So let's get into the video. So when it comes to the signs and symptoms, in this video today, we are going to cover the 9 most common signs and symptoms. Again, we are talking about diverticulitis, and we're not going to be talking about complications, so things that, require surgery and things like that, but we're going to cover the 9 most important, most common signs and symptoms of diverticulitis. So that's where we're at. And really, that's the most important because that's what impacts our quality of life, our day-to-day living. Sufferers of diverticulitis, of an attack of diverticulitis, they struggle the most, and because it's a bowel condition, it's often a hidden disease, and it's something that is not shed a lot of light upon, but it's rather brushed under the rug, and people tend to suffer in silence with it when they shouldn't. So let's shed some knowledge on the signs and symptoms of diverticulitis. If you're new here, I'm a medical doctor, and on this channel we talk about things regarding medicine and lifestyle. So if that kind of stuff interests you, then like and subscribe to the channel. We've just hit 1,000 subscribers, so hooray for the channel. Let's keep it going. So the first thing to talk about here is, what is diverticular disease? That's the first question. And the second question is, what is diverticulitis? How are these two different? How are they related? Are they the same? Are they not the same? They're just terms that fly around often. So let's define them concretely before we jump into the signs and the symptoms of diverticulitis, not diverticular disease. So right away we know that they are a little different. So what is diverticular disease? Let's cover that aspect first. Diverticular disease is a condition of the gastrointestinal tract. So the gastrointestinal tract is from the mouth all the way down to the anus where the poop comes out, but diverticular disease affects the colon primarily, the large intestine, this long snake-like organ in our body. And diverticular disease, as you can see in the photo here, it's when these little pouches form. So condition where small pouches called diverticulae form in the lining of the digestive tract in the colon, in the large intestine. So that is what diverticular disease is. Now, on its own, this may or may not be harmful, but we'll get to that in a moment. That is what diverticular disease is. Somebody can have these pouches form. As to why they form, we'll cover that in another video. But here is what this pouch looks like when you go zoom in into the colon. And then this pouch can get inflamed, so it can get red around it for a number of reasons, but that is then what we call diverticulitis. So itis means inflammation, and diverticula we just covered in the definition of diverticular disease. So diverticulitis is when the pouches, the diverticula, become inflamed or infected. Now this is a problem because it causes signs and symptoms. Now these signs and symptoms, they can vary. They can overlap with other illnesses, other diseases, and that's what makes it complex. The treatment, again, can also vary, and it depends on the severity, and that we will leave for another video. You can check the other videos out that we've made on this topic. We've covered that in a lot of detail. So now, let's get into the first sign and symptom of diverticulitis. We know what diverticulitis is now. So the first sign and symptom actually of diverticulitis is nothing. So something to really mention is that diverticular disease can occur and present without any noticeable symptom. So in many individuals, we can in fact remain unaware that they have these diverticula, and only when they flare up, when they create diverticulitis, then they cause signs and symptoms. So this is rather a sign and symptom of diverticular disease. So it can be nothing at all. Diverticular disease increases with age. So 35% of people by the age of 50 have it, and 60% of people by the age of 80 have it. And a lot of them have no symptoms at all. They never get diverticulitis, or they very infrequently get it. And therefore, one of the main signs and symptoms of diverticular disease in this instance is nothing at all. Now let's move on to actually diverticulitis. So the signs and symptoms of when it is flaring up. The first one that is most evident is actually, you guessed it, pain. So pain is number one when it comes to diverticulitis. So it's something that can vary, like we mentioned, and the treatment can vary as well. But in first instance, there can be mild discomfort. So some people with general diverticular disease may experience mild abdominal discomfort and cramps, and it's typically in the left lower side. So if you draw a cross down your belly button, at your belly button, it's the left lower side because that's where the colon is. That's where the pouches are. And then what happens as these pouches become inflamed more and more, as the diverticulitis gets more and more pronounced? What happens then? Well, then they become inflamed. They can then cause a lot of trouble, because what they can do then is they can irritate nearby tissues. They can irritate nearby nerves, and then this can lead to abdominal pain. This can be quite severe, to be honest, so it's something we need to keep an eye out for, because inflammation triggers the body's pain receptors, and then it causes discomfort and tenderness in the affected area. So again, primarily in the left lower quadrant. Another thing that can happen is that we can get muscle spasms as well. So that is something, when there's presence of inflammation or infection in those pouches, this can trigger muscle spasms in the colon itself, in the large intestine. This then leads to cramping and sharp stabbing pains. So pain is a predominant feature of diverticulitis. Bloating and gas, that is quite common as well. So this leads to a feeling of fullness in the abdomen. When you have experiencing of bloating and increased gas production, this can lead to fullness. This can be uncomfortable and just as much of an impact on the quality of life as some of the other signs and symptoms that we're going to go through. But just as much as pain, bloating can cause issues, gas can cause issues as well. And that's why it's so important to focus on the diet. We've made a diet regarding diverticulitis, so have a look at that video as well. The other predominant feature then down the list is bowel change. So bowel change is quite prominent. Diverticulitis can occasionally lead to alterations in bowel habits. So this can manifest itself as one of two things. So it can either be diarrhea, or it can manifest itself as constipation. And a lot of the time, this depends on the individual. It depends on the severity of the flare-up, and they can actually interchange, right? It can alternate between both diarrhea and constipation episodes. So that's prominent as well. How much is a normal bowel habit, right? So how often should we be going to the toilet without knowing that it's diarrhea or constipation? Well, that's something called colon transit time. So that's the duration it takes for food to pass through the colon, through the large intestine. Again, we made another video on that, and another prominent feature of that is fiber. So we're not going to go into fiber because we can talk about fiber for an hour regarding diverticulitis and diverticular disease. So let's just keep it at that. Then we move down the list as well regarding signs and symptoms. The next one we have here is blood, the presence of blood. So that is not good. So when we have blood, it's obviously very alarming, and it's something that we need to be extra mindful of, because again, there is overlap with other conditions, other illnesses that we need to be mindful of. Again, another video on that, but in this video, let's talk about the blood that happens with diverticulitis. So it's typically painless, and it's typically bright red. Why is it bright red? Why is it maroon colored? Well, that's because it's happening in that lower part of the colon, that lower left area we were mentioning. That's what causes. If it was coming from higher up, it would be darker red, and that would point us in other directions. So that's when it comes to bleeding. So that's something very important to know about. Then another sign and symptom is infection, right? So infection is very important. Bacteria become trapped and multiply within the pouch. That leads then to infection. This infection then leads to further inflammation, further swelling, further tissue damage, intensifying the pain, and makes you feel very, very bad. So infection is a very, very bad thing that occurs with diverticulitis, and oftentimes it's treated with antibiotics and things like that. We cover it again in other videos, but that's just to keep it simple in this video. Now, diverticular disease and diverticulitis, it has complications. So we're not going into some of these complications, but we are actually. So one of the complications of diverticular disease is diverticulitis. So that's something to keep in mind. So this is the main complication we are covering in this video, which is diverticulitis and the signs and symptoms that come along with it. And then finally, we extend beyond just the gastrointestinal tract. So we can have fever, we can have nausea, and we can have vomiting as well. So inflammation and infection in the diverticulitis, it leads to an elevated body temperature, results in fever. It leads to nausea and vomiting because of the pain, the inflammation, and the infection. So those are the signs and symptoms of diverticulitis. We've flown through it in this video. Check out our other videos for more. Like and subscribe.